Welcome in, everybody, to the brand new CBB Central Podcast. My name's Kevin Sweeney. I'm sure you've seen my work before at CBB Central on Twitter, cbbcentral.com. Super excited to be working with my good friend, Brad Cavallaro, and putting together this podcast. Brad, thanks so much for working with me, and I'm really looking forward to covering college basketball with you throughout the rest of this season and beyond.
Of course, Kevin. I'm really excited for this. For those of you who don't know me, I've been writing at Busting Brackets, which is part of Fansided, for probably about the past 6 months. I'm at Twitter at BradCav2, and I'm just really excited to get this podcast started. In terms of our plans for the podcast, we're going to try to do twice a week from now until the end of the season, in which case we'll do the normal off-season stuff. We'll do coaching carousel, transfers, that sort of stuff. And then into June, some NBA draft. And then in the summer, we have some big plans. We're hoping to do take probably two teams per podcast and do about like 20 to 30 minutes on each team, go really into detail and give kind of analysis that you can't really find unless you go to a local podcast, a team-specific podcast. And then in terms of tonight's podcast, we're going to start with some underrated and overrated teams. So, Kevin, do you have any specific teams that you think are really undervalued nationally right now?
I mean, it's so tough because you look around the landscape and there's just a lot of teams where you don't really know. There's so many inconsistent teams in college basketball right now. I think one team for me that I would highlight is Florida State. Just watching them tonight against Virginia, the way they competed. Yes, they've been kind of up and down, and they played down to the level of their competition a bit this season. Loss at Wake Forest, certainly not a good one. But I mean, this team has some athletes. They're very long, and I really like. They have pretty good point guard play from CJ Walker, and so to me, this team has a chance to really make some noise. And as maybe in that 8 to 9 seed range in the NCAA tournament, a team that could really, bust some brackets if they play their game, as you saw tonight, competing with probably the best team in the country in the Virginia Cavaliers.
Yeah, Florida State is actually one of my favorite teams to watch. I think they probably have 4 of the most improved players in the entire country between, Terrence Mann made the jump from a 5th starter type of guy to a leading role. CJ Walker and Golaridis, as you mentioned before, also made huge steps forward. But Phil Kofer has transformed from like a kind of a energy guy to a skilled 4-man. And I totally agree with you about the 8 to 9 seed range. And I was sitting in class today and I checked the scores, and St. John's was beating Villanova, Wake Forest was beating Miami, and Florida State was beating Virginia. So I was like, what is going on tonight? But I do wish that Florida State would have pulled that out, because I do agree that they are very underrated. That kind of would have validated that in a national sense. But it's still good that Virginia got the W there.
Yeah, and I must say I have a soft spot for Virginia. I'm sure many of you know. I was early in on the Virginia bandwagon in the preseason, had them as a team that I thought could maybe make some noise as like possibly a top 10 club even. And so to see their success has kind of drawn me a lot of Twitter fame. So the Cavs can keep rolling as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah. All right. So then for my underrated team, I had written this before tonight's results. This is a team that I was on the bandwagon preseason. I am very reluctant to get off, even though I probably should. And that is Seton Hall. I've had Seton Hall ranked the entire season. And even though that they did lose and in the process get swept by Marquette tonight, I still think that they are top 25 worthy. They have some great wins. They beat Creighton at full strength. They won at Butler. They crushed Providence, and they have the Louisville on the road and Texas Tech neutral win in the non-conference. So besides these 2 blips to Marquette and a loss at Rutgers, I still think that this is a quality team. I will admit that they're not the top 10 team that I thought in the preseason, but I still would not want to be matched up against Seton Hall if I'm a 10 or 11 seed in the tournament.
Yeah, I think my problem with Seton Hall, and Seton Hall has been kind of a team that I've never been quite as high on, is that you just never know which team you're going to see. I mean, get blown out at Creighton, get lose tonight to Marquette. Like they've just been some performances this season where you just wonder where they are. They have a pretty strong senior class that's been together for a long time. And I think that's something that you can never overestimate in March is the value of having seniors who are in their last chance together to go in deep, make a deep run. And I really like Miles Powell, but I mean, it's a team that's not exceedingly deep. It's a team that I don't know what I'm going to get from them week one. I kind of liken them to Alabama a little bit, kind of opposites in terms of experience level, but in the same way, just you really aren't sure. Are we going to like if we see good Seton Hall? That's a top 15 team in the country. Do you agree on that?
Oh yeah, definitely. But the depth thing I think is the biggest thing where they ride those four main starters and then they kind of switch off Sonogo and Enzi at the 4. But other than that, they hardly get any production from their bench. And when you have guys like Carrington and Rodriguez that like to go one-on-one a lot, it's tough to be over-reliant on those types of players.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I saw them in person against DePaul a couple of weekends ago down in Chicago. For those of you who don't know me, I'm a student at Northwestern University up in Evanston. So I do get around to a lot of Chicago area games while I'm on campus. And so being able to check out that game, I mean, in the first half, I saw a team and I was like, wow, the Seton Hall team is really good. They got some production from Miles Kale. They got a lot of production from Sandro, Mamu yeah, and I'm just not going to say that name properly. Aaron Gordon, like they got some good production from that bench. And when they do that, and then, I mean, because that team's going to hammer you on the boards. When they can hit some outside shots and they can get some production from their bench, they're really tough. But at times you feel like their only good asset is that they're really strong athletes who can rebound. And that can be a frustrating thing to watch with Seton Hall team.
Yeah, I totally agree. Especially because they don't have a ton of lineup versatility where like Desi Rodriguez looks like he would be a good power forward that you could slide to like a smaller lineup. But they really stick with the Enzi or Sonogo and Delgado, hammer the offensive glass, and that kind of limits them in terms of offensive flexibility and creativity.
Right, and I think that goes back to a lot of it's the depth. If a Miles Kale or an Aaron Gordon were to step up and become, a guy you couldn't keep off the floor, then you'd have a lot of different things you could do. You could play Desi at the 4, or you can, and that would be a really interesting lineup for me because he's such a versatile player, and I think one of the more underrated players in all of college basketball, just because he's the leading scorer on this team. But I think when people think of Seton Hall, they think of Angel Delgado, they think of Miles Powell, they think of Kadeem Carrington. So if they could, you just feel like they're one piece away. If they had that extra guard where they could go small sometimes and they have so much lineup flexibility, because Sonogo and Enzi can guard all 5 positions, and that's such a valuable thing defensively. But it does hinder their offensive creativity and versatility, as you said.
Especially because Carrington isn't a natural point guard, but Seton Hall has, they use Isaiah Whitehead as a full-time point guard, but they don't have another guy that can shift Carrington off the ball. Gordon's very limited. He pretty much just brings the ball up. That's his lone responsibilities. And Miles Kale really struggles handling the ball. So even though he's maybe a capable shot maker, he's not a great offensive player because ball handling and the ability to create off the bounce is just so essential.
Yeah, and I think I said preseason that I thought the upside of this team was Jordan Walker becoming like a 20-minute a game point guard for this team. And he really hasn't lived up to the expectations. There was he was injured, and then there was questions, was he quitting the team? And he's really struggled. And so that's just, it's just, you feel like they're a team that could absolutely lose in the first round of the NCAA tournament and absolutely go to the second weekend in an Elite Eight, and who knows, maybe in the Final Four. So they're going to be a really interesting team to watch come March.
Okay, so then in terms of an overrated team, Kevin, who do you have as a team that's getting a little too much credit nationally right now?
This is really tough for me because I think there's a lot of teams that I wouldn't necessarily call overrated, but I think there's such a divide right now between Purdue, Villanova, and Virginia and the rest of the country that teams in that 4 to 9, 10 range in the country, they don't feel like top 5, top 10 teams in college basketball, but they are, just because I think there's a pretty strong gap there. And so a team like Xavier, to me, yes, they're 22-3. Yes, they find a way in every ball game, but they don't do it in any. They're playing a lot of close games, and yes, they have senior leadership that helps them win down the stretch with guys like Trayvon Blewett, who I think is one of the best players in the country, JP Mikura, who is one of the most fun players, in my opinion, to watch in the country, just because of the passion he plays with. But it is concerning when you look down their schedule. They blew out Marquette, but other than that, the last few games, overtime against Butler, needed overtime to beat Georgetown, 5-point win at St. John's, 9-point win at Seton Hall, 6 points against St. John's. They just play a lot of close ball games, and they just feel like a vulnerable club to me.
Yeah, I was at the Xavier at Providence game when Providence picked them off, and they did not feel like a top 5 team. Very, very top-heavy production with Blewett and JP Mikura. Quentin Gooden has made enormous strides from last year when he was a complete liability to now he's a good starting point guard. But outside of that 3, very inconsistent production. The guy, Kerem Kanter, who's a grad transfer, he has taken over the starting center position, and he's playing really well offensively. But guys like Tyreek Jones and Kaiser Gates, who were starting earlier in the year, have fallen off in terms of role and production.
Yeah, they're an interesting club because if you look up and down the stat sheet, they have 7 guys who are averaging 7.8 points a game or more, which is kind of incredible at this level. But it's a balanced attack, but it doesn't feel like it's a balanced every night attack where sometimes it's Cantor and sometimes it's Gooden and sometimes it's Jones, and when they get multiple guys stepping up, they're going to be as tough to beat as anyone in the country. But I feel like there are some nights where I don't think they're a top 5 talent team. I don't think they're necessarily like a top 5 best coach team. I think they're really experienced and they know how to win, and they close games, I think, as well as any team in the country. And that's kind of why they've been able to continue to win. But when you go up against the nation's elite come March, I really wonder how they'll match up.
Yeah, another huge key for them is the emergence of Najee Marshall, who's moved into the starting lineup. He's a really good-looking freshman, and he's one of probably the only 3 or 4 players that can consistently get their own shot, because they have a balanced scoring attack, but guys like O'Mara needs to be set up. Jones is more of a dump-off guy. Gates is a spot-up shooter. So the offense can slow down and get a little stagnant at times.
Yeah, I really like Najee Marshall's game. I think he's a kind of a perfect fit for what they want to do. At 6'7", with the length that he has and the ability to, step out and shoot the 3, not an elite shooter by any means, but someone who you do have to respect from downtown. And so to have a guy like that who can kind of do everything, play a little bit of defense, Chris Mack is a tremendous coach in getting his guys who are young to continue to give good defensive production, but also to slash and get to the rim and get some buckets, is kind of the perfect complement to JP Mikura and Trayvon Blewett, who are, all around scorers, and Mikura, especially, more of a shooter. It gives them so much positional versatility on defense as well, because, Trayvon Blewett 6'6", and JP Mikura is 6'5", and then you have Najee Marshall. And so if he's kind of playing that small ball 4 role, if Blewett's that 4 and he's the 3, you can kind of switch everything 1 to 4. Because even Gooden is 6'4", and that's a lot of positional versatility, especially because their centers, especially when they play Kareem Cantor, don't really provide you much from a defensive standpoint.
Yep. So in terms of my overrated team, I have Clemson, and so Clemson is a team that was absolutely rolling. Then they lost who I think is their best player, Dante Grantham, to an injury. Since then, they've played 4 games. They were destroyed by Virginia, which, you can't really fault them for that. But so they beat at Wake Forest, at Georgia Tech, both wins. They beat UNC, but UNC was without Theo Pinson, who only played 2 minutes with a shoulder injury. So people are kind of, I think, they're putting too much stock into this 3-1 start without Dante Grantham, when you played 2 of the easiest road games that you can play, and then you played a shorthanded UNC team who's borderline top 25. And the schedule is taking a really sharp turn. They have Pitt next, which should be a win. But then they have at Florida State, Duke, and at Virginia Tech. So I think that 3-game stretch is going to really determine if Clemson is, this 2 or 3 seed, which most people have right now, or if they're going to slide to the 7-8 seed range. I think that their computer numbers might be too good for them to fall to 7 or 8, but they could realistically finish 10-8 or 11-7 in the ACC, which would be a pretty sharp drop from where they are in the projected brackets.
Yeah. I think the 4 to 6 range is probably where they wind up, and I think that's probably right for them without a guy like Grantham. I really want to give credit to Brad Brownell. He's done a really good job this year with this team. I find him really fun to watch. Their guards are really good. Marquise Reed, I remember watching him as a freshman at Robert Morris give everything he could to Duke in a 116 game, and to be here now as a 16 point per game scorer in the ACC is really cool. And Gabe DeVoe and Sheldon Mitchell are also really solid players. I think it's going to be tough for them to maintain that 2 to 3 seed level. I don't think that's the level they'll be, and I think they'll be a vulnerable 4 or 5 seed playing against a really good mid-major in the NCAA tournament. So I think the overrated aspect is unfortunately just because of the injury. I was really just starting to get sold on this team, and then to see them lose that game was kind of lose a guy like Grantham was certainly disheartening. But the North Carolina win does say something, and I think it will be something that the committee does look at. Obviously, Theo Pinson wasn't there, but if they can finish, so they have seven games left. You're going to beat Pitt, you would hope. Probably a loss at Florida State, loss at home to Duke. If you can win one of those 2 road games at Florida State and at Virginia Tech, that puts you in great shape, because I think they should beat Georgia Tech at home. I think they should probably beat Florida State at home. I think they're still a better team, and they're on their home floor. And then a toss up at Syracuse. With Syracuse, we'll probably be fighting for a bubble spot right there. So if they can finish in that 4-3 range, and then as long as they win a game in the ACC tournament, probably find themselves in that 4 to 6 range, which, coming into the season, if you had told me that Clemson was a top 6 seed in the NCAA tournament without Dante Grantham, I would have said you were crazy. But we once again credit to Brad Brownell.
Yeah, I'm usually someone who defers to the side of keep the coach an extra year instead of firing them, because if they had fired Brownell, maybe they lose some guys to transfer. You have to give that new coach 2 or 3 years to rebuild. But giving him that extra year, really paid dividends. Even though they're losing Grantham, they didn't get Zion Williamson, but still this breakout performance this year should be enough to turn some Clemson fans around on Brownell.
Yeah, it's super tough, because in general I kind of go the other way, in that I think a lot of times coaches are kept a year too long. But Brad Brownell's, and there are examples around the league where that's the case, in terms of, I would say Pat Chambers at Penn State, although they are making some progress this year. He's going to be his 8th year without an NCAA tournament bid. And Brad Brownell's criticism coming into the year was justified. He really has struggled in his tenure. He hasn't made them a perennial NCAA tournament team. And I think when you're hired at any Power 5 job, with the exception of maybe a couple here and there, the expectation is, within 3 to 5 years, you're turning this into a team that expects to go to the NCAA tournament most years. And so he didn't really do that, but he's done a great job with this team, make no mistake about it. And I think the future is bright there. This is a veteran team, so it'll be interesting to see how he rebuilds next year. I don't know the specifics on the recruiting class other than missing on Zion, which was obviously just a crushing thing for Brad Brownell. I know how much time they devoted to recruiting him, and I know what, they were really in a great position to land him, but couldn't get it done. But definitely speaks to the job that Brad Brownell's done. And I think he's changed a lot of opinions, definitely, in Clemson.
And so in terms of recruits, they have a pretty solid class. It's three-star players. They have John Newman, who's a 2-guard. They have Hunter Tyson, who's like a stretch 4, and then Trey Jameson, who is more of a 4-5, I think. I don't know if any of those guys are instant impact guys, but they do bring back Sheldon Mitchell. Marquise Reed could grad transfer, but presumably he would be back. And then Thomas should be back too. So Clemson will have some pieces for next year. I don't know if that's an NCAA tournament roster, but definitely Clemson fan should hope for this season to be the breakout year. Yeah,
absolutely. And it's really good to see a team with veterans in college basketball. I always find it fun to see a team develop over a few years. And you look at last season, this was a team that lost so many close games. And I think a lot of people blame that on coaching, and they blame that on a variety of factors. But in my opinion, I think it really strengthened this team. I think guys like Marquise Reed and Shelton Mitchell really learned how to win down the stretch. I mean, guards, it's a tough league, the ACC. I mean, it's probably one of the best. It's probably year in, year out the best league in college basketball, or the second best league in college basketball, depending on how you value it versus the Big 12. And so it's so tough to be a lead guard in that conference and finish games down the stretch. And they didn't do a good job of it last year, but they've really developed, and it's been something that's been fun to watch. And one of the better stories, I think, in college basketball this season.
Yeah, Washington's another team that, they were not good last year, even with Markelle Fultz, but all of their supporting cast of Fultz got so much experience that now, as juniors, you throw in a star freshman, Jalen Noel, they've shocked everyone.
Oh my God, Washington! I mean, Lorenzo Romar should be embarrassed. I'm sorry. You won 9 games with this roster and Markelle Fultz last season. Like, are you kidding me? I mean, obviously, Lorenzo Romar was known as a guy who could, was a recruiter first and then a head coach, if you will, a guy who you weren't expecting to make great in-game decisions comparative to some other guys. But that's nothing to take away from what Mike Hopkins has done with this team. I think he's done an awesome job. I think he's really developed his guys in terms of Matisse Thybulle really taking the next step as a versatile defender, and Noah Dickerson kind of just being a beast down low. But it's just, I really just laugh every time I look at Washington, on track to be an NCAA tournament team, in my opinion. Just was absolutely god-awful last season with the number 1 pick in this roster. It's pretty crazy.
Yeah, I remember looking at their roster in the summer and thinking, they bring so many guys back, but yet they were so bad. That's kind of the toughest situation to evaluate. Like Tennessee was in a similar boat. Like, Williams, Bone, Turner, all these guys are back, but can they take that next step? And it looks like both teams have.
Absolutely. And I think the thing that was so hard for me with Washington was I didn't know what the culture was there with Romar. I mean, obviously you saw guys like David Crisp and Noah Dickerson coming back who were guys who could score the basketball and who could obviously had talent, but were they guys who were going to buy into a new culture, and were they going to buy into maybe not playing in such a free offensive system that Lorenzo Romar played in and designed up? And so to see all these guys just buy into, playing in the zone and getting and they've been an exciting team to watch offensively. It's not like they've been a team that's really had to grind it out and play in the 50s and 60s, but it's been really interesting to watch how they've developed. And they've gotten some contributions from young guys that they brought in late. They brought in Isaiah Carter and Hamir Wright from upstate New York as recruits that Coach Hopkins was familiar with from recruiting at Syracuse. Brought those guys in, and they've been good bench players. And Isaiah Carter has given them about 5 points a game, gives them some length in the zone, kind of a perfect fit there. And Hamir Wright has been kind of up and down, but was a 4-star big man in the 2018 class and reclassified to come play at Washington this year. And he's protected the rim for him a little bit. He's done some things, and so the future's definitely bright in Seattle. And it's kind of incredible. A year ago today, this team was last place in the Pac-12.
And looking ahead to next season, if everyone who is in the rotation comes back, this could be a very highly ranked team. Dickerson, Thybulle, Crisp, they're all juniors. Noel's a freshman. Timmons is a sophomore. And as you mentioned, Carter and Wright are freshmen. And then you add a pretty strong recruiting class with some versatile wings. I will be very interested to see where Washington is slotted for next season by the national media.
Yeah, it's going to be really fun to watch, and I think I definitely think they could be a top 25 team next year. But I don't want to look too far ahead. I'm excited to see what they can do down the stretch.
Yeah, you always have to keep me in check. I'm always looking too far ahead.
Absolutely. All right. So that was some good stuff on the overrated, underrated teams. And I think one of the teams that we can look back on that was, the most overrated coming into this season was Northwestern. Something that's sad for me to say as a student here. But what are your thoughts on this team and what's happened to them this season? I know there was an article on ESPN.com by Adam Rittenberg talking about just a lack of focus from this team in the preseason lead up. And I think there was certainly a possibility that was going to happen, kind of that, Super Bowl hangover that they always talk about in football, or the World Series hangover in baseball. And I mean, making the NCAA tournament doesn't seem like something that would cause that, but at Northwestern, where that hadn't happened ever before, it is understandable. But the Wildcats playing their best basketball of late. Kind of, what are your thoughts on Northwestern the start to the season, and now having won 4 or 5, going into a critical stretch in Big Ten play? Maybe they can rack up some wins and turn a lost season around.
So no team has made me look dumber than Northwestern. Mm-hmm. I had Northwestern at 11th in the preseason. Logic being, your 4 best starters are coming back, and then Aaron Falzone coming off injury. He's a former starter. In my mind, that was like 5 starters coming back from a team that made the round of 32. I was like, this, I'm sure of it. This is a top 15 team. And I think the article and your analysis hit it right on the head. They were too full of themselves from an NCAA tournament win, and it carried over. And you wouldn't think that could happen after just making the round of 32, but when you put it in the context of Northwestern's history and all the national media telling them how great they are and everything, it makes a lot of sense. I did notice McIntosh and Lindsay, their numbers are in their shooting percentages are a bit down from last year, and Falzone has not regained the form from his freshman year. And I had thought that their depth was going to be pretty good, but Isaiah Brown, who was a key piece last year, he's been non-existent, and guys like Barrett Benson and Gavin Skelly haven't really taken the next step.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you look at up and down this roster, the only guy that improved from last season only 2 guys that improved in any significant way from last season were Jordan Ash, who's basically a little used bench guard, who's become kind of a rotation bench guard, one of the first guards off the bench, and Derek Pardon, who's really blossomed into one of the better big men in the Big Ten, one of the better stories in my mind in the Big Ten. But Scotty Lindsey's been one of the most inefficient scorers in college basketball at the high major level. Just a really disappointing season from him after a breakout campaign a year ago. Bryant McIntosh has been hurt. He's really fought this season. And Vic Law's been up and down. He's such a talented kid, and he defends all the time, but he doesn't always seem engaged on the offensive end. And one of the things I noticed, and they've been able to combat this a little bit in this run with going to some zone, is this team can't match up man-to-man with a lot of Big Ten teams. I mean, this was a flawed team last year in terms of, they found ways to win, and there was a bit of magic on their side. But one of the things that they had last year that they don't have this year is Sanjay Lumpkin. And Sanjay Lumpkin didn't score a ton, but he was that glue guy. And most importantly, I think on defense, he was a 4-man who could switch a lot of ball screens for them. So they could switch 1 through 4, even 1 through 5 on ball screens, because Derek Pardon's a pretty mobile big man at 6'8", but is pretty quick laterally. And so they were able to do a lot of switching on ball screens. And now when you play Gavin Skelly at the 4, that's a big mismatch of a point guard is attacking Gavin Skelly. That's a bucket every time. And I think Northwestern's done a good job adjusting that, going to that 2-2-1 zone press and then dropping back into the 2-3. But that's been a major challenge for them. Starting to play better of late. And I've said, I said it on Twitter last night. I don't think anyone wants to play Northwestern when Bryant McIntosh, Scotty Lindsey play well. But it's obviously an uphill battle to get to the NCAA tournament at this point. Probably need to win the conference tournament. I don't know your thoughts. I think if Northwestern could win out except for Michigan State and get 2 conference tournament wins, at least there might be some talk they could get in. I think the Michigan State win would probably be the biggest thing they could get, would be a win over one of the top 3 in the Big Ten, Michigan State, Ohio State, or Purdue, either in regular season play or the conference tournament.
Yeah, so the problem with the Big Ten and all of their kind of middle of the pack teams is that they were all so like such poor performers in the non-conference that all of the conference records are meaningless. They're inflated. It's pretty much like a record from normally like the A10 of the Mountain West, where normally a high major team goes 10-8 in conference. You think that they would get in the tournament because you would assume that they got a certain amount of quality wins on the way. But these like Maryland, Penn State, Indiana are all hovering around 500 in the league, and a win against them is meaningless. And a loss, even though they're not that bad of teams, could be really damaging. So that's why Northwestern has such a thin margin for error, even though they only have, I think, 5 or 6 conference losses.
They're 6-6, I believe, in Big Ten play.
6-6. So normally a 6-6 Big Ten team is, on the bubble, but has, an actual chance. We can see this year Nebraska could go 14-4 and miss the NCAA tournament. That just kind of speaks to the uphill climb that Northwestern has and the hole that they put themselves in.
Yeah, no, it's really tough, and there's just not a lot of high-level teams in the Big Ten. I mean, what win really stands out in the Big Ten? Beating Purdue stands out. Beating Michigan State stands out. Beating Ohio State stands out. Beating Michigan is like a good win, but it's not like I don't think it's like a resume like, oh my gosh, look at your resume, you beat Michigan type of win. After that, I mean, does beating Penn State mean anything? Does beating Minnesota mean anything? Like, and you kind of touched on it. Nebraska, especially with a conference that has an unbalanced schedule, Nebraska didn't have to play, Michigan State twice, and I don't think they had to play Purdue twice either. And they basically, Nebraska is the perfect example of beating everyone you're supposed to and no one you're not supposed to. Nebraska's best win is Michigan at home, and they could be 14-4 in the Big Ten. And I mean, it's tough for me to leave out a team that wins in a power conference. But at the same time, I mean, is it really a tournament team? And I think this is a good way to segue into our next segment, which is more on bubble talk. And what are your thoughts on Nebraska's chances of making the NCAA tournament?
I was playing around with the RPI wizard the other day, and the margin for error is unbelievably thin. Like they would need to be 14-4 to even be considered, because their whole resume just lacks a lot of substance. It's a lot of smoke and mirrors with that pretty conference record. In the non-conference, they did very little. They lost to St. John's, which after St. John's' win over Villanova tonight is looking a little better, but still, that was a game that they could really use. Just, I mean, even a St. John's win though doesn't mean much. So they are really fighting an uphill battle. I would think that they would probably be a 1 or a 2 seed in the NIT, but ultimately miss the NCAA tournament.
Yeah, I kind of agree with you. And it's not just the RPI that doesn't like them. You look at Ken Palm and Haslametrics and other, pretty much every metric system has them outside of the top 50 in the country. And I think my eyes tend to back that up. I mean, if they went out and they beat Rutgers, I mean, that's the problem is you're going to beat Rutgers and Maryland and at Illinois and home to Indiana and Penn State. None of those wins mean anything. As much as Nebraska wants them to, I mean, maybe it's enough to just like sneak in because the bubble is weak, as we always seem to think it is at this time of year. Maybe it's enough to get them into the first 4. But I think at some point Nebraska has to beat Purdue, Ohio State, or Michigan State in the conference tournament if they're gonna have it. If they're gonna be an NCAA tournament, because if they do that, I think they're in.
Yeah, I would agree. Because even it seems, at least in terms of selection, in the past few years, quality wins mean infinitely more than RPI. Like a team like Buffalo, who has like a 28 RPI, they're never getting an at-large bid.
Right.
But teams, with a 60 RPI and have, 1 or 2 marquee wins are automatically slated above that team.
Yeah, no, it's really challenging, I think, for me to put in Nebraska. And I mean, I credit Tim Miles because I thought this team was going to be terrible, and James Palmer's been awesome, and Isaac Copeland's given him a nice boost. But I think we both agree that the resume isn't so great. What other bubble teams did you want to talk about? I know I put up a piece on my website yesterday about some mid-major bubble teams and kind of my thoughts there. I thought Rhode Island was pretty much a lock, and Nevada was close to a lock. I said they were a bubble team still, but a team I didn't expect would have any problems unless they were to take a bad loss. But the one team I was really interested in was Boise State. Well, what do you think of their resume?
So Boise State is going to be on everyone's first 4 out list, but they're just going to be jumped by teams that are going to have these opportunities to get quality or even like a quadrant 2 win, because on their resume they have not beaten a team that would be an at-large in the NCAA tournament. I think they beat Loyola of Chicago in the non-conference, who might be like a 12 or a 13 seed, but that's is not going to be enough. They were demolished at home. I mean, they were demolished at SMU. SMU is also on that bubble, missing some key guys who were healthy when Boise State played them. But so that's not a great look for Boise State in terms of competing with the field. They have a game in the next week or so against Nevada, which I think is ultimately going to determine their legitimacy as a bubble team.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think they need to beat Nevada if they want to get in. I think the easiest way, actually, for the Mountain West to be a 2-bid league is, Boise State is Nevada actually beats Boise State this time around on Wednesday the 14th, and then they lose to Boise State in the conference championship. Nevada's resume gets boosted by having 2 wins over Boise State, so they have no problems getting in, which I don't think they would anyway, even if they lost to Boise State twice, but I think there'd at least be some questions. And then Boise getting the automatic bid.
So I have a very interesting bubble team, LSU, who had some excellent wins and one really bad loss to Stephen F. Austin at home. They also lost to fellow bubble team Georgia at home, and they lost at Vanderbilt. But they have a neutral court win over Michigan. They have a home win over Houston. They have a sweep of Texas A&M and a sweep of Arkansas. So with that combination of quality road wins, they got the neutral win over Michigan. That's 6 wins right there against teams that should be in the NCAA tournament. I think LSU is in much better shape than their 79 RPI would indicate.
Yeah, they're a really interesting team. And teams like LSU are the perfect example of why I really wish the selection committee, instead of releasing like the top 16 teams at some point in February, would release like the 16 teams closest to the bubble. Because I have no idea how the committee is going to see LSU. Are they going to see? I mean, how much has it weighed the fact that they've only beaten 2 SEC teams this year? They have 4 SEC wins, but they've only beaten 2 SEC teams. The road loss to Vanderbilt. They've played a tough schedule in the SEC so far, and tonight tough loss to Florida. But at some point, you're going to have to win some games. The SEC is a battle every night. You gotta win home games against Ole Miss. You got to beat Missouri at home. I think they have to win all their home games the rest of the way, and probably steal a road game if they're going to get in. I'd say 5-2 the rest of the way in SEC play would be what I would target to get to 9-9 in conference play.
It's kind of weird because like a team like Providence has a loss at UMass, and they have a home loss to Minnesota, who at the time was ranked but has completely plummeted. And they're like a 9 seed with a loss at UMass, but LSU has more quality wins, and similarly has 1 bad loss, but yet is not even in the field. I think too much weight is being put on their low RPI number. I know in the past few years, records have been set in terms of number of losses. Like Vanderbilt last year had the most losses ever for an at-large, and I think lower and lower RPIs have been, getting at-large bids. So that's kind of what's giving me confidence. That plus just the sheer number of quality wins in terms of LSU's candidacy.
Yeah, the quality wins do jump out, but it's not just the RPI. They're at 67 in KenPom, which I think is also a really good tool, especially given that the committee does have that number now. And so like that's not a number of a tournament team. And obviously Will Wade's done a tremendous job with this team. Make no mistake about it. Tremont Waters has been awesome, and the future is definitely bright there. But I don't necessarily think that I'm not quite as high as you. I don't think they're necessarily a tournament team, but we'll see what happens if they can finish strong down the stretch. They really just have to protect their home floor. I think if they go anything less than 4-3 the rest of the way in SEC play, I don't think they have a real good chance of getting in. I think if they went 4-3, they'd be 8-10 in SEC play, win a conference tournament game or two. You're going to be right on that cut line. So it'll be interesting to see how they weight some of those wins and losses. It is interesting to look back. Their scheduling, and I say this all the time, it's not necessarily about who you schedule, but you got to game the RPI a little bit. They've got some real RPI anchors. Beating Alcorn State to open the year doesn't hurt you. Tennessee Martin doesn't help you. UNC Wilmington has been pretty awful this year. North Florida is not a good RPI win. Sam Houston State, these are games that they're winning and it's hurting their RPI. And you hate to see that come around to hurt a team in March.
Yeah, I've thought a lot about this scheduling thing where gaming the RPI, and it's made me think that, you know, a team maybe like Vermont, who everyone knows is going to be good and everyone knows is going to help your RPI for a bye game, maybe it's more expensive to get Vermont to come in. Like maybe, you know, it costs 90,000 for Vermont to come to LSU, but it only costs 20,000 for a 300 team like Alcorn State to come, because I don't know what the incentive would be for any high major team to play teams in the 300 unless it was, you know, saving money.
Right. It's interesting to me because, I mean, teams like Vermont complain all the time that they can't get good games on their schedule. The teams refuse to play them. And I mean, if I'm LSU, the last thing I want to do with a first-year head coach is schedule Vermont to come to our building, and little old Vermont beats us in Baton Rouge. Like, I understand why you don't play that game. And it's not even necessarily you need to play, you know, top 50, top 100 teams to steal a top 50, but you got to stay away from the 300 and the 275 RPI. I mean, play Princeton and play Wright State and play, you know, teams that you would predict in the top 3, top 4 of a mid-major conference. I think you really got to stay away from the low majors, and it's really been an interesting thing schedule-wise to see how it's affected several teams this year in terms of their RPIs.
Another interesting thing that I thought a lot about is in terms of the selection committee having access to more metrics this year. Mm-hmm. I'm very skeptical of how much that they're going to use them. I think they're going to use them to justify what they want to justify, because the RPI is still going to be you know, heavily featured and heavily emphasized, because they just made this whole new quadrant system this year. So why would they put all this time to reevaluate RPI if they're also going to consider other metrics? I think it's going to come down to, you know, a questionable seating or a questionable selection. They may go to Ken Pom or to like strength of record to justify it. But I think the RPI is still enough. The RPI and the strength of schedule are still the two biggest metrics to pay attention to, I think, for this upcoming tournament.
I'd agree, and I think, to be honest, isn't that what they do already? I mean, yeah. I mean, we see such an inconsistency year to year of what makes a team an NCAA tournament team, that you just have a feeling that they pick the teams and then they find the justification because they need to justify it to the media and they need to justify it to the fan bases. They don't use a certain set of criteria every year to choose teams, and that's a frustrating thing. I mean, I don't call myself a bracketologist. I'm not Joe Lenardi. I'm not someone like that, but I do try to figure out who's going to be in the field every year, and I think the lack of consistency is concerning.
Definitely. So another very interesting bubble team that we could talk about is Mississippi State. So Mississippi State recently played their way onto the bubble, and I'm not even so sure how much that they would be on the bubble if the tournament ended today, if the tournament started today, but they are trending in the right direction. They don't really have a bad loss, and they have a road win at South Carolina. They have wins over fellow SEC bubble teams, Arkansas, Missouri, and Alabama. Their next game is huge, is at Missouri. I think that could really solidify them as being a consistent team across all the projected brackets.
See, they're a team that I'm really not all that high on in terms of their resume, just because what's going to be their best win this season? I mean, any game they have left, the best win they could get would be a home game against Tennessee and then a road win at Texas A&M. Other than the home game against Tennessee, I don't think any of those games really move the needle for me. And the wins they have now, I mean, there's some good wins. Like at South Carolina is a good win. Beating Alabama at home is a good win. Missouri's a good team, but I just don't see like a top tier win, and their non-conference schedule is flat out embarrassing. I'm sorry if we're on the topic of schedules. Alabama State, Florida A&M, Green Bay, Stephen F. Austin's a good mid-major, although their RPI is down because they've lost some Southland Conference games. Jacksonville State's okay. North Dakota State's okay. Dayton was meant to be, I think, a team that would have been a little better than they are this season. North Georgia, non-D1 team. The only game they played was only game that was a test was at Cincinnati. They got handled pretty comfortably in that one. It's tough for me to justify just based on a number of wins. I mean, because to me, I like LSU's resume in terms of just looking up and down and seeing the wins right now better than Mississippi State's. but they are playing a lot better basketball, and Ben Helen deserves credit for that.
Yeah, they had the 292nd best non-conference strength of schedule, which is a major black eye, probably the biggest black eye on their resume. I just think if they keep on beating up on these fellow bubble teams, I think that those wins, like a high quantity of those wins, will be good enough because they will be wins against the field. Even though I think home games against those three, the Arkansas, Missouri, Alabama, I think they're all quadrant 2. Missouri might slightly be in quadrant 1 for now. But I think if they could continue to beat these teams in a comparable tier with them, it could make up for not having that signature win, over a Tennessee or over Auburn or at Kentucky or something like that.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think the one thing that does make this interesting is how will the committee value who's the best teams right now? I mean, they've won 4 in a row and they've looked good doing it. And, they have a chance to run up some wins here in the final stages of SEC play. If they go into Selection Sunday having won, say, 10 out of 13, something like that, I think that deserves some recognition come March Madness. And I think that's an underrated thing. We should be really looking for, as much as non-conference wins should matter, I'd rather see a team. For instance, if Arizona State's plays their way onto the bubble, would I rather see a team that, played its best basketball in late November, a team that's playing its best basketball right now?
Yeah, I could, on the topic of Arizona State, I could definitely see them slipping to like a 10 seed or even further down. Those wins against Xavier and Kansas when they were playing, out of their minds with their, smaller 4-guard lineup, and they were just, running teams out of the gym. That has not been the same team of late, and inexplicably they're still getting votes in the AP poll. I was shocked when they were ranked 25th last week, and now they still got 17 votes or 17 points this week, which is unimaginable to me. I was playing around with them with RPI Wizard, and I found it hard to get their RPI low enough where they would be in danger with the high level, high end wins that they have. So I think Arizona State is pretty safe, but I definitely agree with your point that while we need there to be good games in the non-conference and should reward teams for those wins, we still need to have the best teams who are playing their best ball in March in the NCAA tournament.
Well, and I spoke to a good friend of the program, Eli Betger, about this. He does some great work over at Mountain West Wire and a variety of places in terms of bracketology and, breaking down college basketball at a really high level. And, he said that Arizona State's almost guaranteed to be overseeded. And I thought that was a really interesting point in that, a win over Kansas and a win over even at Kansas State is a really good win. Actually, it's not it was a neutral site game, excuse me. And as well as the Xavier win. I mean, they have such incredible wins that, they might find themselves as a 6 or a 7 seed or even an 8 seed when they deserve to be, significantly lower in that, 10 to 12 range. And that can be huge in terms of, that'll make them a pretty vulnerable club. And it'll be honestly quite interesting to see whether the committee would include them in that top 16 teams. I can't imagine they would, but I mean, there's a case to be made with all those great wins that they deserve that. I don't agree. And I don't think you're watching a team that's a top 16 team, but the wins are still impressive.
Yeah. I think in Pac-12 play, I think they have 4 losses to like the Oregons and the Utahs of the world. And I think 2 of them were at home. So those are pretty damaging. I think that we could see a scenario where teams going in totally opposite directions could be in that 8-9 game. Like we could see Arizona State and like Texas A&M. And that's
have that game. That'd be awesome.
Yeah, that would just be a gimme pick for the brackets.
But yeah, I mean, I'm really interested to see how this Arizona State team does finish out down the stretch, because they do have a pretty tough slate the rest of the way. USC next, that's not an easy game. UCLA, that's not an easy game. That's a team that's fighting for their life on the bubble. Arizona at home. All those 3 games are home games. USC, UCLA, Arizona. If they don't win if they don't win one of those games, they're in trouble. I think they probably do win. As long as if they win 2, they're safe. But then they also have the trip up to Oregon, which is always tough, at Oregon and at Oregon State. And then they finish with Cal and Stanford playing good basketball. So as long as they protect their home court down the stretch, they should be fine. But definitely a team trending in the wrong direction as you head into the most important part of the season.
Definitely. And then if we want to do one more bubble team, you think?
Yeah, let's do one more.
I think another really interesting one is Temple. Kind of the same situation that Vanderbilt was in last year, where they have a couple really good wins. They have a great strength of schedule. And even though they're in the American and have some really bad losses, I think if they avoid a bad loss the rest of the way and maybe pick up another quality win, whether it be in the conference tournament or in the remaining portion of the regular season, I think that Temple could be a team that makes a tournament and people are shocked and outraged on Twitter about it.
Let me just start by saying I would hate to see a team that was pretty much a bad basketball team, with the exception of their first weekend of the season playing Old Dominion, Auburn, and Clemson, all in a neutral site tournament in Charleston, South Carolina, and then one win over Wichita State. Like, I would absolutely hate to see that team make the NCAA tournament. I mean, they were just some embarrassing.
That's exactly how I felt about Vanderbilt last year. I knew it was coming, but they've 15 or 16 losses. I was like, oh, and then they got a 9 seed too. So if there's any consistency from year to year, the fact that Vanderbilt got a 9 seed with the most losses ever because of their high strength of schedule, I think that gives even more evidence that we're going to see Temple maybe in the first 4, but I think barring any other damaging losses, we're going to see them in the NCAA tournament.
It should be interesting to see, because I think with Vanderbilt, at least I understood it because I thought they were playing good basketball down the stretch. I really thought that was a good team by tournament time. And I was frustrated by the amount of losses, but at the same time, they were playing good, really good basketball. And I mean, Temple's rest of the way, they have East Carolina, South Florida, 2 really bad teams. At Wichita State, I think they lose that one. Home to Houston and UCF, got to win one of those. And then
they win both, I think.
You have to win both, you think?
Right, because, well, I guess Houston's high enough where a home loss would look bad, but it wouldn't be too damaging. But UCF without Taco Fall, I think that's definitely a must-win.
Yeah. I mean, looking at it, I would say they should beat UConn, and so you have to win 2 of 3 of Houston, UCF, and at Tulsa. And if you do that, I mean, I think it'll be interesting to see how they weight the AAC, because East Carolina is a really bad team, and South Florida is a awful team, and UConn's not very good, and so from that perspective, it's going to be really interesting to watch how the committee weights the AAC. I mean, Vanderbilt coming from the SEC, not a league that's all that well regarded by the committee last season, although it will be this season. It'll be interesting. They'll be an interesting bubble team, and another example where I was like, I'd really love to see the bubble more than I'd care to see the top 16.
Definitely. I think I read yesterday that Wichita State doesn't have a quadrant 1 win yet. I don't know if you saw that too.
Yeah, I think I did read that as well. They've just been an interesting team. They struggled defensively, and I think their best case scenario was last season, and it was an amazing thing to watch. But there's been some regression there. I don't think they'll have any problems getting into the tournament. I think they'll be a good team, but they have some issues to work out. They've got a pretty easy stretch coming up where they can do just that. Although they do have a big trip with Temple at home and then at Cincinnati. That'll be tough. Other than that, they have some games to kind of iron things out and get back on track.
Agreed. So do we want to preview Duke and UNC now?
Yeah, let's run through that one real quick. Obviously, that's such a big ball game. And, I mean, what are your thoughts going into that one?
So Duke, right, coming off a loss to St. John's, but they played Virginia tough the week before. They are really relying heavily on those 5 starters, even guys like Alex O'Connell, who a lot of people thought would be getting rotation minutes by now, totally out of the picture. I think they only played 20 total bench minutes against St. John's. And they are the best offensive rebounding team in the country, which I think could work in their favor against UNC. I think the key for UNC would be Kenny Williams. He was held to single digits in the 4 games prior to the Pitt game, which is their most recent game. He needs to hit shots so UNC can be more dangerous in their small lineup that they've transitioned to, with Luke May at the 5 and Pinson at the 4. And they inserted Cameron Johnson. I think I'm picking Duke in this one. Would love to hear your thoughts, though.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting game to me because on one hand, I don't see a way really that Duke loses it, but at the same time, I have a feeling that they will. I think Roy Williams probably has to zone Duke. Is that fair to say?
I would say so. I wouldn't think that like Theo Pinson guarding Marvin Bagley is going to be a great matchup for them.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I think what you have to do is you have to zone them, and you have to make Grayson Allen and Gary Trent hit threes, because Marvin Bagley's not a great shooter. Wendell Carter can step out a little bit, but he's not a very good shooter. Trayvon Duval's a horrific shooter. And so I think you zone them and you make Marvin Bagley make really good decisions in the high post, because I think they have interesting length, because Kenny Williams is long, Cam Johnson is very long, Theo Pinson's very long, and so I think that could work really well. They don't have really a rim. Luke May's not really a rim protector, which doesn't really bode well in a zone. But I think that's the move I think that they have to make is to go zone. I think the side of me that's just logical says that Duke wins by 10 to 15 points. But I mean, on the road in Chapel Hill, it'll definitely be rocking there. And Senior and Joel Berry, I think, will try to keep him in it, and I think it'll be a really good game. Maybe not one for the ages, but I think it'll be a fun one.
Yeah, UNC's not really playing their best ball of late either. They lost at Virginia Tech to NC State and then at Clemson before blowing out Pitt. But we need to see if they can regain their form against a more formidable team than Pitt, who is they are in a bad place right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we could have a whole podcast about how bad Pitt is, but it's a mess, and I think Duke definitely needs to get back on track. I think there's a little bit of pressure off, if you will, because there is no pressure to win the ACC. Virginia's got this thing on lock. They're up by a full 3 games, and they're going to run away with this thing. And so Duke can kind of focus on getting right for the NCAA tournament, because they're a team. I don't think it matters if they're a 4 seed or a 2 seed or a 1 seed. They're just so talented that if they're playing their best basketball, they're going to be as tough as anyone to beat and go win a national title.
I think lastly, we should just round up with Arizona UCLA, which is a enormous game for UCLA, who only has 1 road win right now, and that's at Cal. They have home wins over Washington, USC, and then neutral court win over Kentucky. But if the Bruins are to be taken seriously, and the Pac-12 is to get 4 or 5 teams in, I think this is a game that UCLA really needs.
Yeah, I would agree. It's a big opportunity for them, and Aaron Holiday's been playing really good ball, and I think he'll have to have a huge night. I just don't know how. Kind of similar to the UNC game, how they match up in the front court. I mean, DeAndre Ayton and Dusan Ristic versus Thomas Welch and Gigi Golemon doesn't seem like the best strategy. I know Thomas Welch is a really fun player to watch, but he's not the best interior defender. And so the challenge there of guarding DeAndre Ayton or Golemon on DeAndre Ayton is not one that I think Steve Alford has much of an answer for.
I've seen recently that UCLA has gone to their smaller lineup with Wilkes at the 4. I wonder if they try to match up with Arizona and go back with a Golemon guarding Ayton, or they try to get a mismatch with Chris Wilkes using his perimeter skills and his quickness to really put the 2 Arizona big man lineup at a major disadvantage.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I think it might be what they have to do is just say we can't beat you when we play 2 bigs, and you play 2 bigs. But if we can space you out with Chris Wilkes, who's been playing pretty good basketball, Jalen Hands kind of next to Aaron Holiday, and Prince Ali, who's been actually playing pretty good ball as well, and just space you out because Thomas Wells is such a floor spacer. If you can just play 5 out and get as much space for one-on-one dribble penetration for Aaron Holiday, I think that's an interesting matchup, and it's probably the way they have to go if they're going to win it. I don't know how they match up defensively, but it should be a tough one. I don't really see UCLA winning this game. I think they hang close for much of the first half. I think the bigger game for them is at Arizona State, not a team coming up this weekend, and not a team that is unbeatable, but a road win that would be impressive come March.
Agreed. I think Arizona takes this one pretty easily. Positive note for UCLA, as you kind of touched on there, they have 5 road games left, so they have plenty of opportunities to bulk up this very, very paltry road resume. But earning one here would definitely put them in everyone's bracket. But I can't see them getting it done.
Yeah, that's pretty much all I have there.
And so that's going to wrap up tonight's show. Thank you for tuning in. Sorry for any production or any sort of inconsistencies, but we will continue to do our best and keep trying to put out a high quality product.
Yeah, absolutely. This was really fun, Brad. I'm going to work on getting this podcast on as many platforms as we can to get it out to as many people. I'm going to investigate getting it onto SoundCloud and Apple and all those places that people typically find their podcasts. The first couple times, we're still kind of getting through the bumps, both on the podcast and off the podcast, in terms of getting it published in the right places. But we're going to really work through this, and I'm really looking forward to continuing to build this thing, and this should be fun. And thanks you so much, guys, for tuning in, and it should be a fun one coming down the stretch in March.